One second. Let's do it.
Welcome to Fairy Tale Flip. This is the November episode, which was originally supposed to be kind of our Halloween-esque episode, but this is kind of we're combining the two. We are talking about Jorogumo, a Japanese spider shape-shifting kind of monster folk tale from Japan. I'm Vanessa Y. Rogers. I have a podcast. What is my podcast? Why am I forgetting my podcast again? Fabric of Folklore. My podcast is Fabric of Folklore, and Donnelly Fields is my co-host, and she has a website for educators called Scaffolding Magic, and we come together usually once a month to talk about fairy tales, folk tales, mythology, and kind of flip them on their head and understand them from the context of when they began and how their meanings have changed and transformed through the generations. And so we are going to be talking about this kind of creepy tale from Japan, and Donna is going to give us a rendition of it.
Okay, yeah, thank you again, as always, for that great introduction. And also what we're doing is talking about the subliminal messages we get from all of these tales, and we want our listeners to be aware of them. So today is one of these other kind of monster stories. I would never have picked it. Vanessa loves these things. She has 3 young children, and they love these types of stories. But then after she suggests them, and I have a lot of resistance, I finally see the beauty in the story, which is exactly what happened this time. Once again, there's a beauty to this story. Most of it is just to become aware of what these stories really are telling us, the underlining theme of the stories. So this one, I'm just going to give an overview of the story, because Vanessa has given many versions of the stories in her YouTube account, but we'll also be referring to the different versions. So generally, it's simply a spider. Jorogumo is the evolution of a spider that receives magic powers when it reaches 400 years of life. It's a she. It's always a she. Her anatomy changes dramatically. At 400 years, her form evolves. She transforms into a beautiful and attractive woman. She stops feeding on insects and begins to devour humans, men. She attracts to her nest young men in search of one-night stands. And the spider, we call it spider demon, attracts young men with her beauty and her melodious music. She plays with the biwa. All right. So how do we feel about that, Vanessa?
The biwa. I don't think I came across that. What does that instrument look like? Is it a string instrument?
Oh my goodness. You know what? I always think that you're going to do this, and so I didn't look it up, but I will. It's a lute. It's a Japanese lute. So yes, it is a string instrument. Great question.
Okay. I did see several references to sometimes they are lured in by her music, but it's not in every story. It's only in a few stories, but that's really interesting.
Yeah.
So tell me, let's ground ourselves in the country a little bit. Have you been to Japan, or what is your frame of reference for this country?
Interesting, because I have been in Japan. My sister spent 35 years as a delegate, a U.S. delegate for the educational system, making collaborations between the Japanese educational system and the U.S. educational system. So I went to visit her maybe about 30 years ago, and I did not have a great experience. I'm very tall, and I was very big. I was much bigger, heavier than I was. And the Japanese, hopefully it's better now, but I've spoken about this even to the Japanese. They're very... they're not as schooled in foreigners as you would hope they would be. And they make a lot of fun of big white people. And so I didn't have a great time. My sister loved it. I didn't have a great time. I know other people who've had similar experiences. So that's very Go ahead.
I've never been to Japan. I lived in South Korea for a couple of years teaching English. And I'm not sure that they were making fun of you as much as they just don't have any sort of filter when it comes to, at least this is what I experienced in South Korea. And I think that this is similar in many Asian countries when it comes to aesthetics and how people look, and so they're always commenting on people's looks. One of the things I'm very my heritage is very European, so my undertones of my white skin is very red. I have very ruddy complexion, especially when I'm cold, and I do not do well with cold. And so anytime it was cold, which is a lot in South Korea, and Japan as well, my nose gets really red, and my students would call me Rudolph because
Oh my goodness.
because my nose was so red. But this is just like, I think it's just very cultural to be constantly commenting on one's looks, even in like interviews. When we would have like Zoom interviews for getting a position, sometimes if someone was of not a skinny stature, they would ask them to like turn around on the camera so that they could see
Really?
how large they were. Yeah. So it's just like it's just it's a different way of seeing. They have like, it's kind of a problem, at least in South Korea, in like that there's such a focus on weight, and they would have scales in the bathroom, in the girls' bathrooms, and it was not good. For their, and it's acknowledged.
I do love that they don't have filters, because that's a really nice way to say it. Sorry, keep going.
But I think it's acknowledged that it is an issue that they are, as a culture, trying to talk about. At least I don't know if they're trying to work with it. Obviously, we have our own body shaming issues here in the U.S. They just look different.
Oh, big time. Yeah. I never knew you lived in South Korea. Why is it we've never chosen a South Korea tale?
I don't know. I guess we'll have to do that sometime.
I think we're going to have to. I'd love to hear more about this, because I've never been to South Korea. It's one of the countries I traveled around the world, and it's one of the countries I did not get to. So,
well, the thing about South Korea is it's a very small country. It's about the same size of Indiana. So it's like a very small country. And when the North invaded the South, they destroyed. It took them like just a few days, and they destroyed so much. So like almost all of their ancient temples were destroyed during that war. And so a lot of what you see in South Korea has been rebuilt. And so they're not from, it's obviously a very old culture, and there's a lot of heritage there, but a lot of the buildings that you see are recent. And so in that sense, it's not as exciting, because when you're going to Europe and you're seeing these 1,000-year-old buildings, and you just are in awe of how old this culture is. South Korea has this old culture, but you don't see it in their buildings and their architecture. So that's always something that I found sad.
Well, you do see that in Japan. So, I always encourage people to travel. I think it's very, very important. I went to Hiroshima. I went to the places where the bomb was dropped, and that was very, very important to have been there and to see it. Mm-hmm. But personally, it was a difficult trip because of that. It was very culturally different, as you say. So let's talk about this, because it's a really interesting monster in Japan.
Yes, it is. I just wanted to mention, so we talked mostly about South Korea, but I wanted to talk a little bit about Japan. So Japan, if you think of it where it is, obviously it's in Asia. It's to the right on a map, so east, never eat, east of South Korea and China and Russia. It's kind of shaped a little bit like a J. It's made of about 6,000 islands. So it's not just one peninsula, it's a lot of different islands all together. And because of that, they have a lot of frequent earthquakes. And there are two, like, just fun facts. Bowing is a really important etiquette. So, in the deeper the bow, the deeper the level of respect that you're showing. And then also, and I think this is pretty predominant throughout Asia, slurping is a compliment. And you always hear this about, like in China, like the louder you eat, the more complimentary you are to the chef. And I noticed this as well in South Korea, that they would make more food noises. And my children do this as well until you correct them. And the other day I was asking my daughter, I said, why are you eating like that? And she was like, well, it tastes better when I open my mouth. And I was like, oh,
Interesting.
it does taste
Wow.
better, but it's not polite in American culture, and so we don't do it. But it does actually taste better the noisier you are.
That's interesting. Okay, and the other thing that I think it's really important to mention about Japan is that it's a very it was and still is a very closed society, and they literally banned foreigners for coming onto the island for 200 years, from the 1600s to the 1800s, and only by warrior ships coming in did they allow foreigners to come into the country. And so they wanted to really
Wow.
maintain their culture. And I think that's very important to know. So they still are very vigilant about maintaining their culture.
Oh, okay. So I
They
wanted
don't
to
like the foreign influence. Yeah. Okay.
foreign influence. Well, you know, out of all of the Asian countries that I have been to, and I haven't been to Japan, but they have the most unique fashion style. In South Korea, their fashion is pretty monolithic, I guess is the right word. They dress all very similarly. But in Japan, I feel like from the images and from hearing people talk about Japanese fashion, it's a lot more outlandish. And it's okay to be a little bit more out of the rigid norm conformity. So I think that's interesting that you see that a little bit more in Japan. But what you were saying about them closing off foreigners to Japan, those dates that you listed are during the Edo period, when the Confucianism religion really takes hold of Japan. And I wanted to go briefly over the three different main religions that we see in Japan, because they have a lot of influence on um, the meanings of the Jorogumo story.
Great. Okay.
So Shinto is the indigenous religion, and it comes, the earliest that they recognize it is from 300 BC, and it is a nature worship similar to when we were talking about the Aboriginal people. It's animistic in that they, every single object, people, rocks, mountains, a great blade of grass, they all are infused with a spirit or a soul, which they refer to as kami, Kami. And it really has a focus on ritual rather than moral. So there's a right way to do the rituals and a wrong way to do the rituals. And there's an emphasis on being in harmony with nature and with kami, and with each other. Community cohesion is incredibly important to this religion. And it is also important to note that during this time, when this was the main religion, there were recognized female deities that had a relatively respected spiritual role. Most notable is the sun goddess Amaterasu. And there were examples in Japanese society during this time of matriarchal communities where there was a mother or an older woman who was the leader of this the community, and that is strikingly different from later on in Japan. There's a funny quote that I found. I really like this one. In Japanese culture, there is a belief that God is everywhere, in mountains, trees, rocks, even in our sympathy for robots or Hello Kitty toys. I really like that. So there's no temples, there's no scripture, there's no like being accepted as a member. It just simply is a faith that exists for anyone who wishes to practice in this ritual. Do you have any did you do any research on this religion or thoughts on it?
I didn't do the research on the religions. I do know, because I know people who have lived in Japan, for instance, Americans who've lived in Japan and have Japanese culture in their ancestors. It's really interesting because I'm not sure about the other two religions that you're going to talk about, but there is a very large Catholic population in Japan, or Christian, we could say. And so there's a lot of things that we have in our culture, whether we're Christian or not. In the US, for instance, we're very prudish when it comes to sex, for instance, and that has to do with the story. It's a big part of the story. So I'm wondering if you're going to bring up this aspect of it, that they don't have the qualms that we do in our Puritan society in the States.
Oh.
Sex is a lot more free, except for the Christians.
Oh, that's interesting. No, I didn't come across that at all. So that is interesting.
Okay.
I wonder where that comes from, because I would say that and obviously South Korea, my experience in South Korea is not equivalent to Japan. It's just closer to to Japan than what we experience in American culture.
Yeah. No, I had a friend who was telling me she was very free in her relationships in Japan, and I questioned her about it. And she said, "You don't understand that they don't have the qualms in Japan about having sex with different people that we have in the States, and it's simply cultural. It's not a judgment. It's why not?" Anyway, so that's my experience with that. Yeah.
Okay, so the second religion that comes in that has a strong influence on the government and daily life is Buddhism. And it arrives from Korea and China in about the 500s CE or AD. They're pretty much the same. They mean the same thing. And Buddhism does not acknowledge a god or a higher being, but it does have a scripture. And it does have a caste of people, monks, who study those ancient scriptures and lessons from Buddha. And it has a really strong influence on the government. And in fact, during a period called the Nara period, Buddhism is used to legitimize this government's rule, and claims to protect Dharma, which has a lot of different meanings, but in this context, we're just going to say it's the right way of living for Buddhist practices. So Buddhist introduces moral teachings. But remember, in Shinto, it was not moral teachings; it was ritual, ethical principles. So like karma, most of us have heard about karma. Right livelihood, how you're supposed to live, and then a moral cosmology, the afterlife, rebirth, and consequences of actions, which is not a part of Shintoism. So it's really interesting when Buddhism comes into Japan, instead of it kicking out the indigenous religion, it just kind of intertwines itself in with Shintoism because they work so nicely together. They don't have a lot of conflict. And so even today in Japan, you will see people with a Buddhist shrine and a Shinto shrine right next to one another. You'll see people having a Shinto wedding and a Buddhist funeral right after one another. And so there's a lot of this it's very circular. It just works well together because there's not a lot of conflict.
Okay. All right. And if hopefully this won't be too impactful, but again, because sex is so important in the story we're about to talk about, with Buddhists, they have a little more, they've more norms about it. The sexual relations they're permitted. However, they're supposed to avoid actions that will cause harm, such as adultery and dishonesty. And that has a lot to do with how the spider is viewed in the story that we're about to talk about. So go ahead.
Yes. And I was just also going to say that when Buddhism comes in, it does have an effect on gender roles and the female roles in society, because there are concepts, the 5 obstructions and 3 obediences, that posits that women are spiritually inferior and subordinate to men. And so with the introduction of Buddhism, you see the marginalization of women in Buddhist institutions and elsewhere because it's infiltrating all elements of the country.
That's right. And I know it's a little dangerous to say, but from the little that I know about Buddhism, and I do know a lot of people who are Buddhists, there is a discrepancy between how male monks are treated in Buddhism and the nuns and the women. And so, yeah, there is sort of a hierarchy in Buddhism. And what I wanted to mention about Shintoism, because that's what you brought up first, and that's what we think of Buddhism and Shintoism, that's what we think most people are following in Japan, is that sexual relationships in Shintoism and Hinduism is natural and sacred, just as what they believe, that there's natural energy in everything we do and say. And so that, again, has a lot to do with the attitude of sex in the story we're going to talk about.
Okay, so the last religion that I'm going to mention is Confucianism. And remember when you were saying that they blocked out foreigners, and this is during the Edo period. And so I didn't do a ton of research on that period, but that's really interesting. I don't know who took control. But it ends around 1868, and I'm guessing another governance came into that period. But Confucian ethics really emphasizes proper ethics, proper conduct, blind obedience over critical thinking. It has a really rigid hierarchy, and it really is, in some instances, can be dangerous because it can justify authoritarianism, and it has a emphasis on respecting elders, the filial piety, and social order. And so during this time, the gender roles in Japan prior to this were complex and more fluid. But now, when Confucianism is introduced, it's much, much more rigid for women, and they are much more marginalized in this social structure.
Okay, and then I'm going to add also, because it's very important that we add the sexual relationships. And Confucianism is exactly what you were saying about the general idea of following this religion. It's forbidden. Sexuality is taboo and is forbidden for most people unless there's a forged formal arrangement. So it needs to be within a marriage, and it needs to be with the idea that it's going to create another human being. And in other words, sex outside of marriage is forbidden, and it's supposed to be for procreation purposes only. So that's very important.
But after the 1868, whoever came in, they changed a lot of things. And I don't think Confucianism is as practiced today. Mostly it's Buddhism and Shinto together. And they legalized Christianity, as you said, that there's Catholics in Japan, and they allowed for freedom of religion and opened Japan up to new religious movements and global religions. So that's really when we saw the change.
Right. So then what's really important in the same period, in the Edo period, is when the samurai began. Did you do any research on the samurai, Vanessa?
I didn't, no.
Okay, no, because that's where I started having fun, when I realized that there's a very strong connection between the tale Jorogumo and the samurai warriors, because of exactly when this tale began to become popular and was created. The samurai warrior is very important. It began in the Edo period. So I just wanted to talk about that very briefly, if that's interesting to you.
Well, and it's also part of one of the most original stories, because one of the original stories is there's a warrior who's walking down the street. It doesn't specify that he's a samurai, but a warrior is walking down the street and he sees a beautiful woman who has a child, and she says, "There is your father." She looks to this warrior and she says, "This is your father." And immediately he recognizes that she's a supernatural being, and he pulls out his sword and he slashes her. And then they run up to the attic, and he discovers that she's actually a Jorogumo, has been feasting on humans. So yes, that's definitely, I don't know if in the story it was intended to be a samurai, because I think there were different warrior classes, weren't there?
There were different warrior classes. I didn't go into it that deeply, but what I wanted to say was, at first I was sort of mesmerized by the story, and I thought, this is a creepy story, big spider, she's awful to men. And I thought, well, maybe I can just make the spider the heroine, as I have done in most European fairy tales, because that's what I do. And there was, I actually couldn't sleep last night because I did some reading on this. I started obsessing about it. But there's so much misogynistic language attached to this story. I don't know if you realized it, Vanessa, but whenever someone talks about it, there's a woman enticing a man. There's an unsuspecting person. He's very innocent. It's a young, handsome man. The the spider ensnares her victim. She slowly weakens the men day by day. And there's a lot more. She's a suspicious creature. She turns so dramatically from a beautiful woman, sometimes with a baby, into this horrific spider. And so I was thinking, this is really aggressive, and this is really pretty misogynistic. So I was doing a little research and saw that in the Edo period, the samurai warrior was sort of invented, created, and was very, very a big part of the Japanese culture. So I said, this has got to be important. So what you've shared about the Confucianism period and the beliefs behind it, that there's so much rigidity, and what I was saying about the sexual relations in Confucianism, that it's really not allowed outside of marriage, all of a sudden the story made a lot of sense to me. There was more context. So tell me if this makes sense to you, Vanessa. We have this beautiful seductress who lures young men, innocent men, into her lair and then slowly eats them. And for me, what it was pretty much was these incredible samurai warriors. And I do want to just talk about a little about what a samurai is, if people don't know or haven't done any research. For them, it is such a strict training. There's so much about being a samurai that is very rigid and very difficult to achieve. And if they fail in any respect, then they are rejected from the samurai. I'm not sure if it's I don't know if you would say tribe. I need to find the word, a fighter, from the group. And so if they're not allowed, if they're not permitted to have sexual relationships whenever they want, and we know that testosterone for young men is a big part of their lives, then all of a sudden they're going to start seeing women as seductresses, as this evil kind of influence on them. And it's not them that has a responsibility for being seduced into having sex with someone who's not your wife. It is the woman. It is the woman who is seducing you and enticing you and slowly draining you of energy. So that's how I sort of saw the combination of Confucianism, samurai, and the story being created all at one time. What do you think about that?
Yeah. I was trying to think back of what knowledge I have of samurais, and I think the only real reference I have is that movie with Tom Cruise. I think it was named Samurai, but I have no idea.
I never saw it. Oh, yeah.
It was a good movie. I mean, although I saw it in high school, so I don't know if I would think it was good now. But I enjoyed it then. But it was. I think that the samurai culture is very fascinating. So it would be interesting to see if we found any tales that were directly about that as well, because that is a really interesting culture.
Yeah, you said yourself that in one of the versions that you were talking about, it's a warrior. So they don't say specifically samurai warrior, but most of the time we just assume it's samurai.
Right. But there were different classes, so it's hard to know.
Right. But basically, it's one of those things where it was so important. You could bring yourself out of poverty by becoming a samurai warrior. And just to sort of give it a little more context about why there's such a strong connection between the story of this woman who's seducing warriors into their death is because of the samurai training. I mean, it was really intense. Let me see if I can find my samurai training. There's physical conditioning, there's martial arts, there's physical strength and spiritual training. And you had to be completely adept at the physical training and completely a follower of Zen Buddhism, of Shugyo, of mindfulness, of Raho, all these different things. There's also academic training. So all these different aspects of being a samurai warrior. I didn't see Tom Cruise's Samurai. I expected it showed how difficult it is to become a samurai. And so any kind of distraction is going to be pretty difficult. And again, these warriors are full of testosterone going into any battle and living their lives. And so any woman is going to distract them. So
yeah.
Where do we go from there?
Well, I kind of wanted to talk about some themes and symbolism. What do you think about that?
Okay, let's do it. Yeah.
So I had 5 main themes. The first one is deception and duality. And you kind of mentioned the deception element as well when you were talking about being enticed by a, the monster, the min. There's a really interesting longstanding cultural awareness in Japan of the public face versus your true self, and they actually have a name for it. So the face that you show to maintain harmony, your facade face, is the tatame, and then you have an inner face that translates to true sound. It's your hone, and so this really is one of the themes of the story, because just like in Jorogumo, she is outwardly beautiful, outwardly gentle, but inwardly she's dangerous and deadly. And it really mirrors this social caution about trusting appearances, because the surface harmony that is displayed outwardly can conceal deeper motives. What seems beautiful or desirable might actually trap us into suffering, which really, once again, bleeds into those Buddhist ideals of illusion. This is an idea behind the Buddhist thought process. Nothing actually exists, and therefore there is nothing of which Maya, that's what the illusion is called, can create an illusionary reflection. So this is less like we live in the matrix, but more like our experiences and our beliefs and our conditioning really shapes our perceptions of how we view the world and what's happening around us. And so these deceptive appearances can lead to suffering, which is a really huge part of Buddhism, trying to avoid suffering.
Well, if you don't mind, I want to comment on that, because it's really interesting that deception. Sorry, I'm trying to get my hair under control. It's not really it's interesting that deception is such a big part of the story, and it is. You're talking about duality, because I was having a really interesting conversation one time. I was giving a workshop in Oxford, and there was a Japanese delegate there, and she is very young, very intelligent, and she's very determined to make more of a connection between Westerners and the Japanese. And she asked me about my experience in Japan, and I shared with her the same experience, and she was very, very upset about it. And she said, well, what is it about the Japanese that really that holds you back from having more Japanese friendships? And I was thinking about it. It's not as if right now I'm in Mexico, there are no Japanese here. I've not seen one person who's from Japan here, for instance. But I said, you know what? I think it's that I take visual cues from people's facial expressions. And that's very important of my communication with them. And it's very cultural. It's very cultural with most Asians. And you need to tell us your experience with South Korea. With the Japanese in particular, there's usually a mask. It's from what my experience is that they don't exude much information with their facial expressions, and that's very difficult for me. So I'm not sure if they're being cold or if they're really enjoying the conversation, but I don't see that. It's not a visual cue. And she was fascinated by that, and she also was very upset about that. And she herself actually had a lot of visual cues. She had a lot more facial movements than I typically saw in other Japanese. So I'm fascinated by that in the story, that this is exactly what's deceptive, and yet it's so much part of their culture.
So
in South Korea, what did you say?
I didn't experience that at all. I found them pretty expressive. So I don't know. So I didn't have experience with that. But I do know, in American Native tribes, and not all of them, but at least the ones that were prevalent in Texas, I think the Comanches and the Apaches were here. I think that was a big part of their societies as well, was a stoicism, right? Not showing emotion on your face. That was a really common thing that through Europeans.
Okay.
Yeah. So the second theme I have, and you've touched on this quite a bit, actually, seduction and danger,
Mhm.
and how Buddhism and Confucianism are really trying to warn against these these elements together. And so in that instance, this story can be seen as a morality tale. Um, like how we were talking before, the story really gains prominence during that Edo period when Confucianism becomes popular, and political stability is there, but it's also incredibly strict and has a really hierarchical social order. And one of the values that they are really presenting is um, the moral lesson: a man who strays from duty or discipline by succumbing to lust is punished for his indulgence. And so in this story, we can see it as a metaphor for the treachery, once again, that can lie beneath these beautiful allures, and to be careful of temptation, because you can be lost to that indulgence. And then in Buddhism, um, it teaches that attachment to desire leads to suffering. And so when you have cravings, uh, that the root cause of suffering is that attachment to that desire. Oh, I just disappeared for a second. It looks like I'm back. Including lust, which ends up leading to dissatisfaction and everything that is impermanent. And so it's really trying to dissuade people from indulgence and desire and cravings.
Okay, that's really important. Okay, I'm blanking out on what are the women who, the escorts. What are the women escorts in Japan called?
Oh, geisha?
The geishas. Okay. So what you're talking about is really important as part of the story. As you're saying, there's a deep cultural belief about the dangers of temptation and deceit, which the story pretty much highlights. And it's about the potential dangers lurking. I love these words, lurking behind beauty and the consequences of yielding to one's desires without exercising caution. And then we have the geishas, who that's their job. It's exhibiting the beauty through body language, through music, through the way they speak to the men. And so they are literally seducing the men, bringing down the defenses so that there's interaction. And yet there's dangers about this very enticement from the women. So I see that as an important connection as well.
Yeah, absolutely.
All right, what other themes did you have?
I think this is going to be your favorite one. Power and feminine agency. And just a fear against female power. And so I talked a little bit about when Confucianism comes in, how little power women have during this time period. And the social power of women, this becomes severely limited during this time period. And in fact, they did not legally exist within legal ramifications. And a husband could divorce his wife with a simple letter, but a woman had absolutely no legal recourse to leave a marriage, even in cases of abuse, mistreatment, or adultery. So she had no way to leave the marriage, but he can do it with just a simple letter. So there's very little recourse for women. And so the stories becomes a story of fear, of suppressed strength. So she is a character of vengeful and seductiveness, and you see this happening again and again in Japan and many of their folk tales during this time, because they're exploring these anxieties that women are experiencing because they have so little power over their own lives. And this figure is really supposed to express that reverence and fear for feminine power. there's also I think that's all. That's all. Oh no, the story that I was gonna mention that is similar in this vengeful and anxiety-filled theme is Lady Owa. Didn't look how to pronounce it. Oiwa, and she's a woman who has been wronged by her husband, and then she's murdered, and then she comes back as a vengeful ghost to psychologically torment him. And that was a really popular story during that time period. And that's just another example of how these types of stories start to pop up more and more as women are trying to figure out how they can regain their agency in this very constricting society.
Well, then I think it's fascinating. Once again, I've been looking at geisha, and it started in the Edo period. So we have this connection, which is really fascinating to me. We have Confucianism that started with a lot of rules. We have the story that was created where women are the devil, basically, that they're evil. There's nothing else but negative adjectives regarding this particular monster and women in general. And then we have the geishas, which is literally legalized prostitution. I have no problem with prostitution, so this is not a judgment. It's just that all of a sudden we have legal prostitution so that the hierarchy, the highest samurais, can go in and have sex and not be reprimanded for it, from what I understand. And I think it would be really interesting, someone who's an expert on geishas, from the little I know about it, and I've seen documentaries, I've read books on it. Who knows if that's true, because it's a deep part of the culture, and I'm sure a lot of it is hidden knowledge from people who are not part of the cult from Japan and part of the community of the geishas. It's empowerment. They are taught to be the best that they can. It's another way of coming out of poverty and serving in this way. Sometimes it has to do with sex, sometimes it's simply companionship. But I think it's fascinating that these things are really coinciding in the Edo period. So
yes, that is really fascinating. But the interesting thing about geisha, I think, as well, are that they are like the highest rung of prostitution. Right? There's other types of prostitutes in Japan, but they are not as respected as the geisha. The geisha hold a really high level of respect in that society, and that was probably one of the only means for a woman to have that level of power.
That's right. And again, if we knew more, we could probably say this with more conviction, or I could say it with more conviction, but this is only for people who had money, and not all samurais were wealthy enough to go visit the geisha the geisha women. And so this is only for the men who could justify having sex out of marriage because they had money. And so for everyone else, the geisha, the women were dangerous for them because they literally couldn't afford to have that companionship.
The last thing I really want to touch on is sacred spaces. And this is really important to the Shinto religion. And we talked about how everything in nature and even inanimate objects such as robots and Hello Kitty toys has this imbued spirit in it called kami. And so just as in many of the stories that we've talked about, there are liminal spaces in this particular religion, and waterfalls, which is where a lot of the stories of the Jorogumo are found. Not all of them, but many of them are found at a waterfall. This is a place of natural power, and it is a place where you can seek the divine. And so that's really symbolic in this story.
Yeah, and that's really important you brought that up, because one of the other aspects of the duality of the story is the contrast between nature and the fear of nature, and mostly in Shintoism and the idea of nature being the safe, being the sacred. All of a sudden we have a spider here that is feared. And so there is a big dichotomy there about how the spider is seen and approached and reacted to. So I think that's very interesting. Also, we have a time in the Edo period where, on the one hand, nature is sacred, and the other one, we have the spider that is supposed to be feared. So there's a lot of confusion going on. Not Confucianism, but confusion.
Now, I know you did a little bit of research on the actual spider, because this is a tale that is named for an actual spider in Japan. Do you want to talk a little bit about that?
You said that I did research on spiders. Where? Where
I
is
thought I saw it in your
that?
notes. Well, I did a little. I saw it. I saw it in your notes. I know I did. But
Okay.
it basically. Have you ever seen an orb spider? That's what we call it. Sometimes it's called a Joro spider. Um, it is native to Asia, but is an invasive species now in North America. So it is in North America, and I've seen one attached
Interesting.
to our house, and I remember seeing its giant web, and it is a giant spider, and it is very brightly colored and quite beautiful, in fact. And so the story kind of comes from this spider that builds these really large conspicuous webs, and the spider continuously gets bigger through time, and sometimes even birds and bats get caught in
Yeah.
the webs, and it will feed on those creatures that you don't normally see spiders feeding on. And so that's kind of how the folklore of this tale started, because this really interesting spider, which has the exact same name in Japan, but it's written different. So Jorogumo is written differently when referring to the spider as referring to the spider monster. So entomologists are able to distinguish between if they're talking about folktale or a real spider. Uh, but I found that really interesting, and you should look up what orb weavers or Jor spiders look like, because they can be really beautiful.
No, I am looking up because I did see a little bit of my research on there, but it was less than what you just said. But there are these beautiful yellow. They have long bodies, and they're as big as someone's hand. They can be with their feet. They have beautiful yellow and black stripes in their legs and in their body, and they say they have a gold web. Yeah, it is beautiful, but their legs will actually extend off of your hand, but people seem to be very comfortable having them. So I don't think they're poisonous per
It's
se.
not poisonous. Yeah, that's why I looked it up to begin with, because the kids were really interested in it, and I wanted to make sure it was not a spider that was gonna harm them.
Right.
And it
Yeah.
sometimes the language means entangling bride. That's what
Yes.
it translates to, and sometimes prostitute spider. There's, I guess, some different ways of translating that word.
Right. Which actually buys right into what I'm saying the connection is between, the prostitute spider is the one that will ensnare you, and the warriors who have permitted themselves or have the money to go into a prostitute and have that company. Are they doing the right thing? Will they be kicked out of the samurai clan? One other interesting part of this is that there are only two ways to kill a Jorogumo, and one is to love a person with all your heart, which I think is fascinating. It doesn't say love the woman with all your heart, because actually in one of the versions that you have in your YouTube channel is the man falling in love with his woman. It doesn't save him. But if you love another person with all your heart, then it's not possible to fall under the spell of the seductive woman and her hypnotic music. I love this, hypnotic. So again, it's all about taking responsibility for loving someone so fully that you would never have sex with someone else because you're in love with your wife or your partner. I think that's interesting.
So what other stories did this story remind you of when you were researching this story? What?
Good question.
From archetypes, from the global folk tales or fairy tales?
Well, I mean, there's the Greek myth of Arachne, obviously, and Arachne means spider, and so she has the spider energy, but it has nothing to do. There's no fear about Arachne as there is with Jorogumo.
Right. And in case anyone doesn't remember that story, the Arachne is a story of a woman who competes with Athena to be the best weaver, and she actually wins and gloats about it, and Athena is angry with her and turns her into a spider, right?
Right. Yeah. Don't gloat. Don't gloat when
Don't
the
gloat.
goddess is around. Don't do it.
She'll turn you
Right,
into a spider.
Right. You know, yeah. Or something worse. And then we have the sirens and the banshees, but
Yes.
in European folklores, and they also have to do with duality. The sirens are really beautiful, and their songs lure men onto the rocks. Again, you know, luring men onto the rocks. Take a little responsibility for your urges and your lust. But did you find any others?
Yeah. So La Llorona, remember that there was one or two versions where she actually did lure a man instead of children. Some versions, most of the versions she lures children, but there was at least one where she lures a male to their death. And then there's the succubus-like stories where a spirit comes and drains the life from the victims. I had someone talk on my podcast about a boo hag, which is very similar to the succubus. It's an energy vampire, but in that version, she actually takes her skin off, and so it's very gross. and there's also the Deer Woman, which is a Native American story, and she is a protector of females, and she punishes abusers. So there's very much that, and then there's a lot of shapeshifters in Japanese folklore as well. There's a fox woman, there's a raccoon dog. I'm not really sure why it's a dog and a raccoon. It's a trickery tanuki, and then there's a very famous one about a beautiful snow spirit who kills travelers. So there's actually quite a few shapeshifters in Japanese folklore. I feel like shapeshifting is not as common in many folklores, but it seems to be very prevalent in Japanese tales, which is interesting.
Again, the duality. Yes, very interesting. And then we go back to how beauty, appearance is so important in the Japanese culture. I mean, my sister lived there so long. And for her, literally, I'm not making an exaggeration of this. If you're giving a gift, the box is more important than what's in the box. It's all about appearances. And so this duality is pretty shocking.
Oh, yeah. That's interesting. Now, I'm curious, do they open the present when you give it to them?
Oh, that's a really good question. I don't know the answer to that. I mean, she would give me a present and she would pass it to me as if she were, you know, I were in Japan, and I would open it, but she wouldn't say, no, don't open it in that moment. But I'm pretty sure, yes, you do, because opening it is an art. Admiring the boxes is very important. And then whatever's in it can be very strange.
The Japanese would really hate the way I wrap then, because I reuse bags every single year for Christmas.
Yeah.
And I am not a fancy wrapper. I can enjoy someone's good wrapping skills. I love that, but that's not what I'm going to go for.
It's not one of your strengths. Yeah.
You would not.
You probably horrified people. You horrified people and didn't even realize it. Yeah.
Probably in more ways than one. The reason I asked that was because I remember giving a couple gifts for Christmas to my South Korean co-teachers, and we were like, "Well, open it," and they were like, "Oh, I'm supposed to open it in front of you," and that was not something that they were accustomed to. So I wasn't sure if that was, just where they were from, or if it's, throughout all of South Korea, or maybe it's an Asian thing. I don't know.
I'll find out. I'll ask my sister. That's an interesting question.
That
but it's funny because it did bring up one other cultural custom in Spain. I lived there for a long time, and in Spain, or at least in Valencia, you never give someone that's not in a bag. You have to put it in a bag, even if it's a bag that someone says, do you have some garbage bags for me? You put it in a bag and give it to them. And the bag that's, for instance, from the El Corte Inglés, which is sort of Bloomingdale's, which is their high-end store, if you give it to them in a El Corte Inglés bag, it means that you have more respect for them. If you put it in sort of a grocery bag, it's like, okay, yeah, here it is, but I don't really care about you or what I'm giving you. So these things do translate. We do need to learn about them. So I offended many people because I didn't know about this in the beginning. They would give me these things, and maybe a pencil and a bag. And I'm thinking, why in the world are you giving me the bag? Just give me the pencil. But for them, it's very important. So the Japanese,
and how you receive and give gifts are also important in Asia. You have to do it with two hands because that is a demonstration of respect.
I've seen that when someone gives you their card, giving a business card in Japan is very important. They give it to you with two hands, and you're supposed to take it with two hands. Is that the same in South Korea?
Yeah, everything is with two hands. Shaking hands, everything is with two hands to show respect.
So I wonder, to me, it makes sense that it's to show that you don't have a weapon in another hand. Perhaps that's how it started.
It is curious where that originated from.
Because in the United States, because in Western society, shaking hands, you shake with your right hand because most people are right-handed. It means you don't, at least your right hand is free from a gun.
Oh.
How dexterous you are and you can shoot with a left hand is something else. But it's one way of being assured that at least your right hand is occupied. And that's one reason, that's one of the big reasons why we started shaking hands.
Oh, interesting. I did not know that. That's why that's there?
Yeah,
that's why we shake hands?
Sure. Yeah.
Huh. What about in Europe?
So we actually, I know, Vanessa, we are actually at the hour mark. I can't believe it. I've never been so unaware of our time flying by. Is there anything else that we haven't shared about the Jorogumo?
I can't think of anything in particular. What did you think about the story? Did you like it in the end?
No.
You didn't like it?
Not very much. I loved your storytelling. I loved it, but it was just this dichotomy of this gorgeous woman being so aggressively hated in every single version that bothered me. So I enjoyed it as a story, but I didn't I wouldn't go back and read it if I could choose. What about you?
Yeah, I don't think it struck me as it didn't grab me as much as some of the others have. I thought that it was really interesting, and I really liked how even when he knew that she was a supernatural being and that he would probably be eaten by her, he still wanted to marry her because he was still in her thrall.
Right.
I thought that was
you
really
got to question
fascinating.
his values, right?
But yeah, it wasn't one that I loved as much as some of the others that we've done.
Well, I think also it has to do with how exciting it is to analyze a lot of the witches, for instance, and other quote unquote evil characters in the European tales, because there's more depth to their characters. At least I found that. And in this one, there is no depth. It's a very clear division. She's a beautiful woman. We don't know anything about her character. And then she becomes a spider, and all she wants to do is have the man as her meal. So there's no way to dig in and get to know more about her. And I think that's what we're both picking up on. But it's a great story to talk about, isn't it? This is fascinating.
It definitely, and it gave us a lot of research points that we want to learn about Japan.
Right? Yeah. We'll do we'll do a second part of it after I speak with my sister and we
that'd
do a little
be good.
bit more research. Yeah.
We could bring your sister on.
That would be great. That would be fun. All right. So should we close it up?
Yeah. All right. So thanks so much for listening. Oh, make sure that you're hitting subscribe. I think I forgot to mention this the last time. Hit subscribe, like if you're watching on YouTube. It's so helpful for indie podcasts like ourselves, because then it shows the algorithm, yes, people are watching and are engaging. And tell us what your thoughts are. Did you like it? Did this story grab you? And what would you like us to talk about the next time? We haven't picked anything for December, so we would love to hear your thoughts and suggestions. Until next time, keep the fairy tales and folk tales alive. Thanks for listening to Fairy Tale Flip.
Thank you, everyone. Bye.